Hi, I'm Patrick Dangle, Executive Producer of the OSU-VIO Collaboration Telecast Programs. It's a great pleasure to introduce a new program that we have on a monthly basis, Foraging Focus. And we're going to find out more about that in a minute. But the host is Christine Geller. Christine Geller is an Ag and Natural Resources Extension educator here at The Ohio State University. And she's located in Caldwell, Ohio, in Noble. And as you've seen on the introduction, some of the pictures, they have a really good program that extends just not in Noble County, but all over Ohio, if you want to call it that. So, Christine, it is a pleasure having you on the program.
Thank you. Thank you, Patrick. It's always a pleasure to share what we're doing in our part of Ohio with everybody else in the region. Just based on how our landscape here is in Southeast Ohio, it's really well suited for pasture and forage management. As opposed to our neighbors in Western Ohio, it's not easy to do row crop production here. So we spend a lot of our time focusing on livestock production in a pasture-based system. So my colleagues and I spend a lot of time developing programming that's in that realm. So we do things like beef schools and sheep schools. We've had a lot more interest in goat production lately, so we're branching out and doing more goat type programs. But to be a livestock manager for all of those things, you really have to be a grass farmer first or a forage farmer. So that's what I kind of want to bring across in these programs. Hopefully we'll have a lot of guests in the future that call pasture management their specialty. I'm still a rookie here in the game. I've only been with Extension for a little over 2 years. So I'm finding my fit in the programs, bringing together groups of people so that we can fill the needs we have here.
Well, I think it's very, very important that the background that we have. So where did you go to school at, and what led you into becoming an OSU Extension agent and educator?
Well, I grew up in rural Ohio. I'm originally from Ashland County. Oh. I really enjoyed FFA in high school, and prior to that, my mom was an agricultural news reporter when I was a little girl, and so I went along with her to all kinds of agricultural meetings, tractor shows and beef shows and dairy shows and tours and farm visits and soil and water meetings and FFA banquet. And I guess that's part of where the seed got started. My mom grew up on a dairy farm in Ashland County, so she instilled those values in me that she learned as a farm kid. My grandparents were fortunate to sell the dairy farm when things were good. And their farm is still in production as a dairy in Ashland County, so that's kind of special. But I really found my fit in FFA and decided that I wanted to go into agriculture as part of my career. I went to Ohio State for my undergraduate. I did degrees in horticultural science and plant science with a minor in natural resource management. And my goal was to work as an extension educator someday. I thought that that would just be one of the most fun jobs there is because every day is different. So as I interacted with people who worked in extension, I asked them, what do you need to do basically to get your job? And they said, well, you need to get a master's degree. So going through my program, I thought I'd really like to do more with animal production, but all of my degrees so far were in plant sciences. And the obvious bridge between plant and animal sciences is forages. So I took a class called Management Intensive Grazing with Dr. Pope at the Columbus campus. And then I also took a forage class with Dr. David Barker, who was my advisor at the time, and just really fell in love with forages then. Got a wonderful opportunity to go to graduate school at the University of Tennessee and work with my advisor, Dr. Renata Nave Oaks. And her main focus was forage production for beef cattle in the Mid-South. So we moved to Tennessee.
So when you say forage, what's your definition of forage?
The best way to describe forages are the food that animals eat in the pasture. So the act of foraging is going out and finding your food source. So when we talk about forages, we're talking about the food that's growing for them out in the field. In a grazing situation, they are going out and harvesting it themselves. In a livestock feeding operation, we are harvesting the food and providing it to them. Where you really draw the line between, say, grain production and forage production would be that our typical forages are grasses and legumes. So we're going to look at things like tall fescue, orchard grass, Kentucky bluegrass, red clover, white clover, birchfoot trefoil. But then you can also go into some of the things that many people look at as cover crops, things like oats, wheat, rye, barley. All of those could be also considered forages. We can also graze corn stubble. We have grazing corn varieties, also soybeans. So it's really a broad field.
It sounds like it. When I listen to some of the shows, Ag News, which Dwayne Rigsby and John Grimes, who's the commercial beef educator, it's rather interesting that the different flavors of the meat, if I can say that, is a result of the different kinds of things that the animals eat. And do you notice a difference with when you eat certain kinds of beef that are corn-fed and others that are forage-fed?
Yeah, and I won't go to say what my preference is because I want to be friends with all our producers. But we have found in taste test panels that there is a preference for the taste of those meats based on their diet. And that seems to really come down to marbling of the fat in the animal. And it's easier to get the meat to marble in a grain-fed diet than in what we would call a grass-based diet. Not to say that it can't be done with grass-fed animals, but it takes more diligent management to make it happen. So it's kind of interesting that the consumer likes that grass-fed beef imagery, but when it comes to the taste test panel, they prefer grain-fed animals. So our perception visually and the opinion of our taste buds don't always line up.
But on the same token, is it not grasses are less expensive to feed the animals than it is would be like with corn or other kinds of things?
That's an interesting question, and it really depends. But what you can say for sure is that grazing is definitely cheaper. Getting the animal to graze, to go out and harvest their own food, is going to be cheaper than feeding hay, which would be your forage, or feeding grain.
Oh.
Anytime you can get the animal to do the work for you, it's going to save you time and money. So that's a lot of the things that we talk about in our programming, is making sure that the animals are working for you and you're not just working for them.
That's true. Now, when we talk about animals, you also include different kinds of animals, and one of them is sheep.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting. Since I started with Extension in Noble County, there was kind of an opening for development of programming for small ruminants, sheep and goats. A lot of my colleagues were doing a lot of work with beef production. Some had previously done a lot of work in small ruminants, but there was kind of a new desire for this information. And thanks to the recommendations of some of my local producers, they nominated me to serve on the Ohio Sheep Improvement Association Board of Directors. and I accepted. And since I accepted that opportunity, I've spent quite a bit of my time developing programming for sheep and goat producers. One of our biggest events as part of the Ohio Sheep Improvement Association is Ohio Sheep Day. And we just hosted Ohio Sheep Day on July 14th here in Caldwell at the Eastern Ohio Agricultural Research Station.
Did you bring some pictures with that?
I did. I brought some pictures. What I wanted to provide today was kind of a summary of what we talked about at Ohio Sheep Day in regard to forages. We also had a paired program the day before that had an emphasis on forages. So I wanted to share some pictures with you and then also some highlights of the day.
Oh, okay. That'd be great.
So I'll go ahead and do that. I do want to share that we had a wonderful photographer with us for both days. Brooke Beam is a new A&R educator. She also has a community development appointment in Highland County, and she took all of the photos that you'll see in the presentation. Well, almost all of them. So in the background here, you can see part of the flock that we have at the Eastern Agricultural Research Station. We are really thankful that they allow us to host a multitude of programs at the farm, including Ohio Sheep Day. As you can see, we had a lot of things on the agenda for the day. We had over 10 speakers come, and they focused the morning on systems. We looked at feeding systems, lambing systems, and sheep working facilities. And then we spent the afternoon talking about forages. If you've never been to the Eastern Agricultural Research Station, I encourage you to go. It's absolutely beautiful.
Where is that located again at?
It's located between Bell Valley and Caldwell. We're just off of I-77. We are about 30 miles north of Marietta.
Oh, okay.
The magic behind everything that happens at the farm is the staff that we have there. And at Ohio Sheep Day, the dean of the College of Food, Ag and Natural Resources and Environmental Sciences came out. So Kath Ann Kress, the dean of the college, was there to present the farm staff with a service award from the Ohio Sheep Improvement Association. They were recognized for distinguished service to the sheep industry. And not just to the sheep industry, but to extension, this group of staff is just the best I've ever encountered. We're incredibly thankful for them. And they worked so hard to make sure that everything was in place for these events. Everywhere, they were just working so hard. They were there mowing grass in the dark the night before to get everything ready. The site where we had Ohio Sheep Day was Unit 1. There's 2 units to the station. Unit 1 has just shy of 800 acres. From where we're standing when this picture was taken, we are up in one of the back pastures near where our natural gas pipeline went through the farm. And you can just see how breathtaking it is. So this was taken the night before Ohio Sheep Day.
Yeah.
Earlier that day, we actually had another program for sheep and goat producers. And that was Southeast Ohio Sheep and Goat School. We did a FAMACHA training, and we had 3 very good speakers come down and do that training. Cliff Little, he's here in my neighbor in Guernsey County. Tim McDermott is the educator in Franklin County. And then Rory Lewandowski from Wayne County was also there, and they helped us teach that FAMACHA training for almost 40 people, which was one of the biggest classes they've ever had. If you're not familiar with FAMACHA, that is a screening technique that's used to determine whether an animal should be treated for parasites or not.
Oh, okay.
So what they do is they look at the eye of the animal and check for signs of anemia. And then based on the scale of symptoms, you determine whether you should treat or not.
Yeah, that sort of makes sense, with the anemia and the parasites, yes.
Right. So what you're doing then by only selectively treating those who really need it is preventing the development of resistant parasites. Our old dewormer practices were to deworm everybody every 21 days. And what we did there was eliminate all of the parasites except the resistant ones. And before you knew it, we had lots and lots of dewormers that didn't work. So by selectively choosing who to treat, we can help reduce those problems and keep our products that working longer. So that was something that happened before Ohio Sheep Day, and we also incorporated a pasture walk as part of that. Wayne Shriver, the station manager, took us out to look at some of the paddocks where they do sheep research, which was really interesting. We really enjoyed ourselves. This played into some basic rules of pasture management and how managing your pasture is really crucial for parasite load reduction. So this is a little bit of a presentation that I gave to the group where we talked about the steps of using pasture to manage parasites. And really the first step in that process is just being a good pasture manager. And what that entails is allowing adequate space for your animals, giving the pasture adequate rest, avoiding feeding in areas where waste is accumulating. Parasites are passed through manure, so we want to keep the animals eating in a different location than where their waste is accumulating. And then also we want to make sure that we're grazing our pastures to appropriate heights, because most of those detrimental larvae of the parasites are found in the bottom 2 inches of forages. So we want to make sure that we're not overgrazing the pasture and exposing the animals to higher loads of parasites. There's many tools that producers can use, and those include things like temporary fence, and you can use that temporary fence to adjust your pasture ratios, so changing the amount of space for the number of animals you have. Then there's also tools like forage guides, pocket guides that you can take with you and determine things like weed identification and growth stages. Those are really effective tools. We can also take samples to determine how much forage we actually have available in the pasture, and we can do that either by taking a fresh sample with a forage square or using something like a pasture stick, a grazing stick, which we did demo for people as part of the class. You can take the information that you gather with those tools and get some general information to help guide you along the way. There are developed equations for grazing situations, and they can help you get on the right track or get in the ballpark of figuring out how much acreage you need per animal based on how much forage is actually available. So here's the outline of that equation. It looks pretty overwhelming at first, but really it's just gathering some information about your farm and plugging it in. So you gather the average weight of your animals. That's something that's hard to say because everyone's livestock is changing in numbers and changing in size all the time. So what you do here is take a best guess. We know based on animal behavior studies how much they generally eat a day based on stage of life. So we can take that information and plug it into the equation. We should know about how many animals we have on the farm. So that's info we should have available. And then one of the key components of getting this equation to work is deciding how many days we want the animals to be in the pasture for. And the best thing for parasite management is to move them every 3 days. And that's because that's how long it takes for the larvae to hatch from the egg. So if we can get them moved out of the area within 3 days, it's less likely we'll expose them to new larvae. So those tools that we use, we can take the info gathered with those tools to find out how much pasture we have, how many pounds of dry matter we have for the animals to eat. So using something like a forage stick, we can determine how much forage we have per inch in the pasture, and then decide how much of the pasture we're going to use. So, for example, if we had 10 inches of forage in our pasture, we would have 7 inches available to graze, leaving 3 inches behind. So we never want to graze our forages all the way to the ground. We want to leave adequate growth there for them to grow back and also have healthy root systems. So basically, you gather this information, you plug it into the equation, and you get some general recommendations on how much space you would need in your operation. It's not foolproof, but it's just another tool. When we talk about being a good pasture manager, there's some other key components. One of the biggest ones is don't overgraze the pasture. We also don't want to back graze when we're talking about small ruminants that are often exposed to parasites. And what that means is they're going back and grazing the area where they came from. That's how they're going to get exposed to more parasites. So if we can control where they're grazing and continue to move them forward, that will help. If we know we have animals that are more sensitive to parasites, we want those animals to graze first so that they're the least likely to be exposed. When we use multiple species in a grazing system, whether that's multiple species of forages or multiple species of animals, our parasite load should also go down. For example, if you were grazing sheep and goats and cattle all together, you'd want to run the sheep and goats through the pasture first and then bring the cattle through after, because the cattle are not affected by the same parasites that sheep and goats are. So that's a way to continue to use your pasture, but still rotate those sensitive animals through.
Now, just a quick question. I'm assuming that you're talking about year-round. Do the parasites live year-round, or is it just during the summer months?
The most prevalent time to have parasite issues is during the summer months. It's during the prime time for forage growth, too. What we're really going to see is June to September be the heavy times for parasite loads. What we've also found in research, though, is that those parasites can go dormant, and they can live in the pasture through the winter in some cases. But what's even more interesting is they go dormant inside the animals. So they can be carried over through the winter inside the animals and deposited on clean pasture. Does that answer your question?
Yes, it does. We have about 4 minutes to go. And one other question that I guess I do have is, it sounds like the sheep day was really, really exceptionally received.
Yes.
When you had so many individuals come in. Are there a lot of sheep farmers in Ohio and in your neck of the woods?
Well, it's interesting, when you drive through Ohio, you might not see that many sheep, but Ohio is the largest sheep producing state east of the Mississippi. So in terms of national standing, yeah, we do have a lot of sheep. Noble County has fewer sheep than it did in the 80s, and that has a lot to do with ineffective management of parasites. And then also, we had a lot of predator pressures. We still have a lot of pressure from predators in the area, but we also have a lot of good coyote trappers. A new predator that's come into our area is the black-headed vulture. Oh. So that plagues a lot of farms in our areas. They not only will prey on sheep and goats, but also on calves. And they can also cause damage to mothers giving birth in the field. So we lose full-grown cows, we lose ewes, we lose baby lambs, We also lose calves to those black-headed vultures.
Now, are they that large that they can lift? I'm assuming the calf or the baby sheep weigh 10, 15 pounds at least.
Well, they don't actually lift the animal up off the ground. What they do is they attack the most sensitive areas of the body. They will pluck at the eyes, the mouth, the rectum, the soft cavities of the belly once the animal is down on the ground. But that's how they secure the prey, is they actually disable the animal by damaging those vital organs so that the animal cannot escape. And then they'll feed on the carcass after that. So it's pretty brutal. The reason it's such a frustrating problem is that the black-headed vulture is a protected migratory bird. So you cannot take lethal action on that bird unless you have a permit from the national level. So prevention and deterrence are the best tools that we have against black-headed vultures. But it does cause a lot of frustration for producers here. If we go back before our time runs out and talk some more about Sheep Day, we were really pleased with how many people came out. We had over 100 people present at Sheep Day. It was very, very hot. So we commend everybody who hung out for the day. We spent the afternoon in the pasture. We had multiple speakers give a pasture walk. Dr. Jeff McCutcheon was there. Rory Lewandowski came back for us. Ted Wiseman, Cliff Little, and Bob Hendershot were there as well. And one of the big takeaways that we got from that message out in the pasture was that we need to give our pastures rest. When we let our pastures rest, we'll have fewer problems with parasites. We'll have less problems with soil health. We'll have fewer problems with bare soil. When we work our pastures, we do cause some stress, and they need time to reboot and regrow, and that only happens if we give them rest.
Understand. Christine, it's been a really good program, and I really look forward to you coming on and talking about various different things. And it sounds like they have the right person for the right tasks, and that would be you.
Oh, not just me. I have wonderful mentors here. There are so many people in our area who focus on pasture management that I'm continually learning the best ways to reach our audience to. So hopefully as we proceed into the future, we'll get quite a few of my mentors here on the air to share more information with our viewers.
That would be great. Unfortunately, we got to leave. And again, I want to thank Christine Geller. Christine Geller is the Ag and Natural Resources OSU Extension Educator in Caldwell, Noble County. And we're going to hear much, much more every third Thursday at around this time. So Christine, thank you.
Thank you, Patrick.
And we will be talking with all of you later.